Even if we exclude the last two disputed copies from consideration, compared with other writings of the ancient world, the New Testament has an enormous amount of manuscripts and an extremely short period of time between the writing and the oldest copy. When the original language manuscripts are compared with each other, we find there are about 200,000 variants or errors in 10,000 different places. A variant is a disagreement between texts. These variants and errors can be divided into two categories, unintentional and intentional. The vast majority of variants are unintentional and can be sorted into three categories. Misspellings. Each time a word is misspelled at a certain point in the text, it's counted as an error. For example, if a verse has the same misspelled word in 537 copies, that counts as 537 errors or variants. Orthographical variants refer to the way words are spelled differently in different places. The difference between the way we spell color in America and the way it's spelled in England is an orthographical difference. Both spellings are correct, but each is preferred at a different geographical location. Homonyms are errors that occurred when the reader said one word, but the scribe wrote a homonym, a word that sounds the same but has a different spelling and means something different. The other kind of errors found in Scripture are intentional errors, called interpolations. These are deliberate changes to the text by scribes. It probably wasn't the scribe's intention, however, to corrupt the text. They would sometimes try to correct what they saw as an error, or to clarify or improve the text in some way. A good example of an intentional error is found in Mark 1:1-3. Note that the HCSB attributes the quote to Isaiah, but the New King James Version attributes the quote to the prophets. Apparently, at some point a scribe recognized the quote was not just from Isaiah 40, verse 3, but also from Malachi 3, verse 1, and wanted to correct the attribution. Although we don't know whether Mark did this intentionally or not, it was not unusual when quoting more than one source to only cite the major one. The difference also illustrates another principle used in recovering the original writing. Prefer the more difficult reading. Between the two versions of Mark 1, verses 1-3, it's easier to explain the difference as a correction from Isaiah to the prophets than to explain it as a corruption from the prophets to Isaiah. The more difficult reading is Isaiah. Therefore, it's considered to have a higher probability of being the original. Earlier I said we had 200,000 variants or errors in 10,000 different places. This sounds like a huge problem, but really it's incredibly good news. Because of the large number of variants, we're able to confidently recover the original text to a very high degree of certainty. One way that helps to recover the text is to read the quotations of Scripture in the Church Fathers. If their quote contains a variant, then we know what part of the world the variant came from and the time period when it appeared. Also, in addition to over 5,600 original language manuscripts, we have over 15,000 copies of early translations. And these translations preserve the errors of the copy they were translated from, which, again, is a great help for figuring out which reading was favored in different locations and when. For example, if the oldest occurrence of a variant was found in Augustine, we would know the variant was from no later than the late 4th century or early 5th centuries and was known in North African copies. If a different variant from the same time period is preserved by Chrysostom, we would know that the variant was found in copies in the Byzantine region. And if a variant is found in Justin Martyr's writings, we would know the variant was no later than the mid-2nd century and known to the Romans. These features allow scholars to divide the copies into three major text types, each with their own peculiarities. The Western text type is named for the versions found around Rome. The Byzantine text type encompasses modern Turkey, Greece, and the Middle East. The Alexandrian text type is named for the copies found in North Africa. The Alexandrian text type has the oldest manuscripts. It's the text type found in most of the papyri and dates back to the 2nd and possibly 1st century. The vast majority of English translations, such as the HCSB, are based on the Alexandrian text type, since it's considered by most experts today to be the oldest form of the New Testament. The text type with by far the most copies is the Byzantine. These manuscripts were written on vellum, which is much more durable than papyrus. The Byzantine text dates from the 9th century onward. The King James Version is based on this text type. This accounts for the variation seen between the King James Version and almost any other English translation. Whether or not the Byzantine is the latest and the Alexandrian is the earliest text type is still somewhat debated. The majority opinion is that the Byzantine is a combination of Alexandrian and Western text types, since it's characterized by harmonizing interpolations and smoothing out of the wording. But the argument that at least some parts of the Byzantine text date just as far back as the other text types does have some good points. As useful as these tools are, there are some parts of the New Testament where we're just not sure what the original writing said. About 400 words fall into this category and make up about 40 verses. However, no essential doctrine is based on any of these verses. As a result, scholars can recover 97 to 99% of the original content of the New Testament with certainty. As it turns out, rather than being disadvantaged by not having the original writings, we find ourselves in a position of good fortune. If we had the originals, a critic of the writings would only need to call into question one document. Instead, a critic needs to deal with over 5,600 documents that agree substantially 99.5% of the time. This ultimately carries as much or more weight than having the originals. Because the New Testament claims to document real history, one of the ways we can test for its reliability is to compare the writings with archaeological finds. Interestingly, much information about the Mediterranean world at that time that was once found only in the New Testament has now been corroborated. Titles, names of local rulers, time periods, and landmarks that were once thought to be in error or even fictional are now considered to be fact. Some important finds include the Pilate Stone, the Gallio or Delphi inscription, the Caiaphas ossuary, the Sergius Paulus inscription, the Pool of Siloam, the Pool of Bethesda, and an inscription documenting Lysanias as the Tetrarch of Abilene. In addition to archaeological finds, there are a number of writings from non-Christian sources that corroborate the New Testament. Some of the more important writings include Jewish Roman historian Josephus, Roman historian Tacitus, a letter to the Emperor Trajan from Pliny the Younger, governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor, and 2nd century Greek satirist Lucian. Using only these 4 non-Christian sources, we learn that Jesus was a real person who lived in Palestine during the time of Tiberius and Pontius Pilate. He had a reputation for working wonders and teaching radical doctrine. He was worshipped as God. His followers met on a certain day of the week and exhibited an extreme devotion even to the point of enduring torture and welcoming death. And there was a communal culture that cared for the welfare of all believers. And his followers were bound by oath to adhere to a high ethical standard. So we see that there is no reason to think that the New Testament we use has been changed or corrupted. Using the tools of textual criticism, we can recover the original text of the New Testament with an extremely high degree of certainty. And we see that the context of the New Testament is corroborated by archaeological finds and other ancient documents. Thus, we can have confidence that what we have is what was originally written.